Welcome, everyone, to our next live broadcast on LinkedIn, where we focus on digital transformation and helping you to be successful in the industry with all the challenges that you have. I have some questions for you today. Are you overwhelmed with the effort required to develop capital plans? What are the challenges in the industry today? What are the economic environments around us really that are affecting you? What companies are doing in the industry to overcome these challenges? Follow this series that we have called Value Undiscovered and how digital transformation is optimizing capital planning. I have some guests with us today that are industry experts, and they're going to be sharing strategies and tactics on how you can be successful in overcoming some of these challenges in the industry today. Join us. You are not going to want to miss this. Welcome, gentlemen. Glad to have you with me here today. How are you today, Phil?
I am doing well, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing good. Matthew?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, tell us where you're coming from today. Where are you located?
We're both based in Vancouver, British Columbia. So I'm at my house, and I believe Matt's in the office today.
Fantastic. Good. Well, listen, I'm really glad to have you with us. Hey, we have an exciting broadcast coming up here today. And for those of you watching, I want to quickly introduce our industry experts here on the broadcast today, and then we're going to be diving right in. So I have on the screen here, I have Phil Jones. Phil, tell our viewers who you are and what it is that you do.
Hey, everybody. So I am the Global VP of Business Development at Copperleaf, and what I do is I work with clients to help them resolve big capital planning and asset management problems, and that's what I and my team do.
Excellent. Hey, I also understand that you have a technical background. Tell us a little bit about your background, your technical aspects of it.
Yeah, I do. So I have an electrical engineering degree from Georgia Tech, a bachelor's and a master's. And I started out my career as a design engineer, designing measure well drilling tools for Schlumberger, in Houston. And I later transitioned into more sitting between designers who like solving problems and people with the problems. And that's where I've dedicated my career ever since.
Excellent. Well, we'll dig more into that as we go forward. Next, we also have Matthew Hayart. Matt, how are you today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me here, Mark.
Really good. Can you tell the viewers, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an engineer by trade, and for the last 5 years or so, I've been working with some of the biggest companies in the world, implementing digital transformation projects to improve their capital planning processes.
Very good, very good. And you also have an engineering degree and a background that's technical as well. And I understand you've worked with hundreds of different companies from a technical aspect. So I think both of those, it brings together some really interesting conversation we have here today. Hey, before we get diving into the broadcast, I like to begin to make sure that we have people coming on board and are joining us. And I already noticed that we've had some friends of mine that watch the broadcast on a regular basis to join. And I think we have Luis, and I think Luis is down in Brazil. Maybe we could just throw him up there. Hello, Luis. Glad to have you on board. And I wanted to just call out to those of you that are out there, if you would just help us out in a couple of ways. I am passionate about getting the subject of digital transformation out into people's hands. And you help me by sharing the broadcast and by commenting and asking questions. And if you look down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen as you're watching the broadcast, there's a button that says share. And if you would just share this broadcast, it helps us get the message out. And second, this is a live broadcast, and you actually have the ability to comment directly, and we see it on the screen right in front of us. And we want to be able to answer questions live in the broadcast today. So if you have some questions, just throw them out there. So for those of you that are out there watching today, just give us a shout out like my friend Luis did, and tell us, where you are or where you're watching from, and we'll give you a little acknowledgement on the screen if you'll put it up as we move forward. We'll bring that up periodically. Or if you have questions, just put them in there. Listen, we are going to jump right into our conversation today. And again, it's a subject that's just really near to me, and which is digital transformation. And one of the things that we're doing here is we're starting to broaden out across the industries and look at what's happening in different industries and how do we leverage the strategies and tactics of different industries, in the ones that we're specifically looking at. So how do we learn from others around the industry? So gentlemen, if we could maybe start out our conversation today. I know that we've all been impacted by, world events and things happening. that I think many times it's a good idea for us to sort of talk about what some of the industry challenges are that exist, out there. Maybe I'll start with you, Matt. Matt, could you tell us that in your world, what are some of the industry challenges really that people are faced with, today in the industries?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a whole number of kind of industry trends and challenges that are specifically impacting capital planning. I think one of the biggest ones is the emergence and focus on ESG. So that's environmental, social, and governance. And what that's forcing companies to do is start to look at their business cases more holistically, right? No longer just looking at the financial returns that their projects bring, but also how they're impacting the world as a whole. And I think that is difficult for a lot of companies because it's not as easy to quantify those challenges as, let's say, return on investment and things like that. So it's certainly something people are facing today.
Okay, yeah. Phil, if I were to come back over to you and say, what do you think are maybe the top 2 or 3 challenges that people are faced with in the industry today? ESG being one of them. What are a couple others that you can think of that are big challenges that they have?
Well, in like oil and gas and chemical, there's a declining growth rate in most businesses, and that's creating some challenges about how do we optimize the core, like the base business that we run, and how do we make sure we're delivering as much value as possible. And I think that's a challenge going on. I think there's increasing global competition, which is also putting more pressure on pricing, particularly in the commodity space. And I think that's tight. All these things are basically tightening up businesses where they really need to focus on how do they optimize the core business and look for other ways that they can grow as well.
So, we typically hear about the standard things that we're seeing in the industry today, like, supply chain shortages and labor shortages and things like that. Matt, are those affecting, these industries as well?
Yeah, I think the labor shortages, and I think that's happening kind of in 2 different ways, right? Like you've got less people to go ahead and execute the plans you develop, and so that has a planning impact. But also there's kind of a lot of people who are retiring with a lot of technical knowledge, and I think companies are losing that expertise as they retire, and especially without a way to capture that and use that information in parts of the business.
Yeah, I definitely, every industry out there today is suffering from, labor challenges. And so I guess, retirements and just the lack of availability of people has impacted just about every industry, that's out there today. Phil, I wanted to bounce this back over to you and say that, in the industries that I've been working for many years, digital transformation has really been coming about. And some industries are more mature than others. How about the industries that you're working in? Are you seeing a growth or an advancement of digital transformation in the industries you're working in?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, a lot of what our company has worked in a lot is utilities. Utilities are interesting because they have had a lot of external pressure their entire existence. They're regulated entities, so they have to disclose how they think and why they make decisions and where they're spending their money and why that's the right thing for the ratepayers and stuff. And so that kind of pressure has really got them pretty advanced in terms of how they think about capital planning and asset management, because they always have to explain it to other people. And one thing I find is that the pace of digital transformation of those processes and utilities has really picked up over the last 5 years. And then, Matt said, you guys were talking about ESG earlier, Matt did. And I want to bring that up because, one thing that's kind of interesting is if you look at businesses now and ESG pressures that are happening, particularly in the investor community and changes in boards and stuff with more activist investors, a lot of businesses that aren't regulated, I think, are going to start feeling a little bit regulated due to ESG things because they'll have to be a lot more explicit in explaining what they're doing and how they're going to do it. And I think that's a little bit of a flavor of what utilities have been doing for 100 years. So I think that's an interesting dynamic too.
Phil, I like that topic. Can I dig into that just a little bit deeper? Is that when you say there's going to be, more pressure on them to be able to, perform in those areas, can you just expand on it a little bit? What do you mean there's going to be more pressure on people to perform in those areas?
Right. So if you just follow along and just pay attention to ESG and sort of investor community circles, and you just, pay attention to these, you'll see tons of pressure on getting to net zero, dealing with the impacts of climate change, dealing with other ESG factors, societal factors, and things like this. And investors are demanding to understand what businesses are doing about that. right? And how they're going to drive and improve their ESG measures over time. And that's becoming increasingly urgent for companies to be able to deal with. It's moved, a handful of years ago, that might have been something the PR department deals with, but now it's becoming much more very top level executive topic. And those executives have to demonstrate progress. So as that trend continues, it's going to push down the need for ESG decision-making deeper and deeper into the companies, where everybody participates in that process of how do we make improvements here. And I think that's what I'm talking about, that just continuing pressure to get better at that and drive toward those objectives.
Okay, all right, that begins to make sense. Matt, go ahead. I was going to ask you a follow-up question, but go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that. Like, I think, like most things, we're seeing this trend and move away from our starting point, which is reporting, right? Collecting data, understanding the baseline of where you're at today. And like everything else, the natural progression is, how do you improve on that? And as Phil was saying, the improvements have to come from a real operationalized point of view, not just kind of initiatives siloed in different parts of the business.
So, Matt, if you take a look at that idea of ESG pressures, I know you've done a little bit of research on that and some things in the past. Is it where do you think some of the key ESG pressures are really coming from and impacting or focusing on people?
Yeah. So as Phil mentioned, the big one is net zero, right? There was the E tends to be kind of the major focus today. At COP26, there was a lot of discussion about how companies are going to actually go ahead and meet those aggressive targets they're setting. And that's a challenge itself. And the E is, carbon, but also comes in, water use, toxic emissions and other things like that. I think the S is also starting to play a bigger role as well, right? How do we impact our communities? A lot of the companies we work with are integral to the communities they serve, and they have ways to impact the quality of life in those areas as well. And governance is kind of coming back to that reporting piece, right? It's been around for a while, and it's kind of driving that reporting, and now it's moving into the risk management.
Yeah, very good. Phil, you had mentioned that there are some industries that are more mature than others, and so we begin to see some growth in digital and leveraging on these ideas of ESG more and more. If I went down that path a little bit and said, if we looked at mature industries, apparently you've worked in some industries in the past that have matured more and more. What do you think is happening? Can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into this from a technical standpoint and how that sort of evolved into what you're doing right now? You said you worked at Schlumberger and some other companies in the past. Can you help me understand sort of that journey that you went on to get there?
Yeah, I mean, so personally, when I was at Schlumberger, I was a design engineer, and actually there was an engineering project that we did. I thought we did a great job as engineers delivering this product to our field services team. And then I got to the field services team, and they said, well, it was pretty good, but they gave us a bunch of feedback about how it could have been better. And then I realized, the designers weren't that involved sitting and understanding the problem. And that's when I completely shifted my career to sit between people who with a problem and people who wanted to do design. I was getting a little bored with the design. So I started focusing on that. Fast forward a bunch, I spent time in my career in couple different places. I worked in Asia and things like that. But then I came back and settled in the technology sector in Vancouver and really focused on that. I joined Copperleaf about 12 years ago. This is the longest I've ever stayed with the company. And I've been just found the problem so compelling the whole time I've been here that it keeps engaging me, and it's just been really fun.
Okay. So you said found the problem. Just be really specific for me. What is the problem? Okay.
Yeah. So let me tell you like this aha moment I had about this.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So when I was working with a utility client early on, it was about 10, 11 years ago, and I joined the company. I understood we had a lot of potential to help companies, but I was talking to them I went in and I talked to a bunch of sort of people who do capital planning, and then I talked to the executive. And what I found in those conversations was the people doing capital planning, I said, well, how do you do the plan? And the first thing they pulled out was this big, huge binder, 3.5-inch binder full of paper. And they said, well, this is our plan. I kind of ignored the fact that they print these huge plans because it kind of instantly makes you think that can't be a very agile environment to work in when the plan's in a binder. But what I found was they were building plans on hundreds and hundreds of spreadsheets and then rolling them up, and they didn't have a good way to compare projects, and to decide which one was best. So it involved tons of debate and negotiation and politicking and all this stuff. And they eventually came up with a plan And they said, this is our best plan. And which was, and that's very common. We find that everywhere we go. It is a very typical process. But when I went to the executives, and this is the big aha moment I had, and this is why I felt so compelled by what we can do at Copperleaf to help people with this, is I asked the executive, I said, what do you think about the plan? They said, well, I think it's a pretty good plan. And then this is where the rubber really hit the road. I said, how do you feel about your ability to challenge it and understand different versions of that plan and what the impact of that would be? And I just got a bunch of silence at first. And then I got a bunch of frustration. And then they basically said, it's so hard to put together one version of the plan. It's really difficult for us to go much past that and ask tons of questions like, what if we move $50 million from this part of the business to this part of the business? And what if we cut the budget by 7%? Those were really almost impossible questions to answer in an efficient way. And that's what really gave me this understanding the power of a digital transformation of these processes and leveraging data and analytics to really come up with the best possible plan. And I've been here ever since.
Yeah, I can so relate to that because, about half of my career, I've worked in big companies, and in those big companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, is that I can't tell you how many times, that PowerPoints and spreadsheets and, the most eloquent speaker represented who gets the capital dollars, for accomplishment, but not to mention the things that you said is being able to stand behind the plan or to be able to make changes or dynamically adjust it. So that's where you're talking about some companies in the industry are applying digital to create success in that area. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, perfect. Hey, listen, I like to acknowledge when we have questions out there. It kind of helps get things going. And we do have a question. If we could just throw that question up on the screen and see if I can get one of the two of you to address that for us. It says, is there any growth in the G component driven by the E component? Okay, increase in government regulations focused toward environmental goals. Either one of you want to try to respond to that?
Yeah, I can for sure do that.
Go ahead, Matt. Give it a try.
What we're seeing is a lot of the major oil and gas companies and other industries are looking ways to find areas where they can grow their market share and grow their revenue in more environmentally friendly ways. So, moving away from burning traditional coals and natural gas and things like that towards adding in renewable energy sources like solar or wind and trying to grow that way. And all of that, of course, is driven by the environmental pressure to reduce their total carbon.
Yeah, and Matt, I think that that we're definitely seeing that in different parts of the world that the increased emphasis in those areas changes based on sort of the climate or the affinity toward movement forward in ESG. Like in Europe, you see more of it in Europe than you do in the U.S., right? I mean, at this point.
Absolutely.
And Phil, but you're seeing growth in that in the U.S. right now, though. More emphasis, you said a few minutes ago, in the U.S., people have more pressure to expand in that area, right?
Yeah, and even independent, the political spectrum changes and stuff, but there's just a constant trend that goes beyond the political environment towards improvements in ESG. And I think a lot of it's being driven by, climate change concerns and things like that. Yeah. That's a huge part of it. But, not to also, there's lots of stuff around diversity, equity, inclusion, and risk management, and cybersecurity. There's lots of different factors in ESG that come into play. All of those are increasing in kind of intensity.
Yeah, one of the things that's really exciting to me, though, is that, we all know inside that we want to be socially responsible and, we want for those things to continue to increase. And many times the business factors or factors around us, external factors, inhibit us from doing everything that we want to do. And so one thing I'm excited about with respect to digital transformation is how we can leverage the community today, the digital community today, to be able to make it easier for us to meet those goals and objectives, whether it be by looking at alternatives or how do we create, more value out of the situation. But I think those are all really, solid, valuable things. Let's see, we have a couple of other questions that have come up. Let me throw that one up here. We have another question up from a LinkedIn user. It doesn't say who it is, but it says, what will be the standard success criteria to measure digital transformation strategy? So maybe we take that question and apply it to the topic that we're talking about for capital planning. So can you come up with some kind of standards of criteria that say digital is good or not as good, when it's applied to capital planning? Either Matt or Phil, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, I can probably just come up with a couple of examples, right? Like when we're working with clients, you kind of look at their business and how they do things now, and then you compare it to what it looks like after, right? And the kinds of results that we see, and this is kinds of things you might measure, refer things like some of our clients, they want to understand, well, how much more risk are they mitigating per dollar spent compared to how they used to do it, for example. And so we've seen clients with a threefold improvement in risk mitigation, right, with the same amount of money, because they're just able to use data and use analytics to direct that money to the right places, just things they can't do right now before they went through that digital transformation. That's an example. Another example is like, how much time does it take for us to produce a plan? How long does it take for us to go through the process of coming up with a plan and getting it approved? And we're seeing 50% reductions in planning time, as another example. So that's just two quick examples.
Okay. All right. Well, good. I had a related question that came up from a friend of mine, Stuart Illiam. If we could just throw that up there real quick. He kind of asked exactly what you were saying, but could you maybe do, Stuart, the appreciation of just giving maybe a specific example of how digital and data management has benefited, ESG? To either of you have an example? We'll talk about another case study later on, but do you have any other examples that you could bring up that say this, how, digital transformation has specifically helped maybe ESG?
Yeah, absolutely. One of our clients here, Copperleaf, is a major water utility over in the UK. And they've incorporated in their capital planning not only this ability to evaluate the projects more holistically in terms of benefits, but also on the cost side, right? So you have the actual capital or operating cost of the project, but they've found a way to incorporate the capital cost of carbon. And by adding this into their planning criteria and their evaluation, what they were able to do is reduce their capital carbon by over 60% since the 2010 baseline, just by integrating those two things.
That's incredible. That's really good. Hey, Stuart, also just to let you know, is that last week I had a live broadcast with a company in the aviation industry who actually has a platform, a tool where they are actually helping people to identify carbon emissions and fuel burn. And so if you want to go back and look at last week's live broadcast in the aviation industry, there's somebody who's applying digital and a digital platform toward reducing, carbon, as well, and in other ways. Hey, guys, I want to kind of move on to the next section here. I want to use a few sort of thoughts that we have is that we've already been talking about the industry today and what's kind of keeping people from being successful. Could we for a minute take a look at, just sort of go back and say, what are some of the things that are preventing people from being successful in getting maximum value, from their capital dollars? Let me maybe, Phil, you want to start with that one, or?
Sure.
Okay.
Like I always break it down into a few problems. I'll start off with the first one. I think probably the most fundamental problem that organizations have is they don't really have a good way to compare even just two investments, right? So, and I'll make that more specific. So most organizations, they'll say, well, what's the business case for this investment, investment A versus investment B, for example. Okay, investment A might have a financial business case. They'll both have a financial business case, but then there's all these other reasons why you might be doing these projects that don't necessarily show up in a traditional financial business case. You might be doing one project to increase cybersecurity benefits. You might be reducing, improving a reliability metric in one of the projects. You might have other risk management concerns in a project. And what we find is most organizations have qualitative kind of siloed descriptions of all these different drivers. So they have like a business case, which is a financial assessment, and then they have all these other drivers for why they do these projects. So if you just take two projects and you say, well, which one should we do? Even figuring that out for two projects when there's a bunch of different drivers is difficult because they haven't gone through a process of coming up with a value framework that incorporates those more comprehensive views of why you do a project. Right. And that to me is the most fundamental problem that organizations have, because you take that problem and you multiply it by reality where they have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of projects to make decisions on. How can they possibly come out of that with some, understanding of what's the best way to achieve maximum value for our business when you don't even have a clear understanding of what value is? Right. That's to me, the most fundamental problem.
Yeah, I think when you start putting it in that context, when you look at the number of factors you're considering for one project and multiply that times tens of thousands. I was on your website recently and I saw a video, and one of your customers said they were managing millions of projects. Is that even possible?
I think it might have been, was it millions of assets, all of which might have projects. And a lot of our customers, like some of our customers will have multiple millions of assets that they're managing and trying to manage the risk around those, as well as some of them have tens of thousands of projects. And actually some of them might have one-to-one relationship where they do a project per asset. So it's possible there's millions of projects too.
Yeah, but you're talking about a lot of factors to consider. And I don't know how anybody would ever be able to do that today and optimize that without using digital and advanced analytics. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
Hey, you brought up a word. I'm going to switch this over to Matthew and see if he can help me with this. Is it, Matthew, you guys have both used the word value a couple of times. Can you capture for me what the word value means when we're talking about it in terms of capital planning?
Yeah, absolutely. So value, I guess at its core is it's really a more holistic way of looking at the return on investments for projects, right? So it's moving past the financial view and starting to consider other benefits like reliability, sustainability, or whatever that be. And I think it's important to recognize is every company is gonna define value a little bit different based on what the objectives of each company is. So while you may have some alignment between kind of what we would call the strategic pillars, whether that be protect the environment, financial growth, things like that, the way they measure those is going to be a bit different.
Okay, so we have, we have $100 million worth of capital projects that we need to, allocate funds to, and there's never enough money to go around. That's my experience has been in big companies. And so if I'm looking at how we're going to determine the best way to place that money and get the greatest value as what you just said out of it, okay, then Phil, you've been saying that we're going to focus on using digital and to be able to analyze all the different factors and all the projects and what the pluses and minuses are. And so maybe could we just switch for a second and say, can we talk a little bit about the benefits of doing something in that manner? I want to talk a little bit about why should somebody consider doing that? Okay. What's the value of creating that value, I guess.
Yeah. And when we get a case study a little bit later, I'll actually give you an actual example from a client. But there's several sort of big areas of benefits. I'll cover one or two of them. Matt might want to touch on some, but one is that consistency and understanding of value. First of all, it reduces just confusion. People understand what drives value for the business. They understand why their project compares to these other projects and gets people bought in. And actually there's this, one of the first things is this kind of cultural shift where people understand what they're trying to do is optimize value for the business. And they go to what's best for us, what's the right thing for the business instead of how do I get my project approved, right? And so there's a little bit of a culture shift. That's one really big, interesting thing. Another thing is when you go to that common value framework and you move into a digital platform for doing this, you can use really powerful optimization engines and you can do scenario analysis very quickly. So you can say, under this set of constraints, you talked about money being a constraint, but there's businesses have other constraints too. Sometimes it's not funding. Sometimes it can also be resources. There could be time windows that are considered constraints, all kinds of things. How do you optimize a plan under your constraints and achieve all your targets? And what's that right combination of projects and the timing to do that? That is a really intractable problem without a digital platform like this. And that is one of the huge benefits you get, your ability to explore the plan in a bunch of different ways and say, this is the right plan for our business. Matt, do you have other things that add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think, exploring different scenarios and different versions of your plan and understanding, the impact of those plans on the business's objectives is really, really valuable. And I think that only happens when you start to implement digital and realize some of the time savings you can create by using a digital platform to create the plan, right? Taking a process that was 3 to 6 months of the year and condensing that into a month really frees up that time for executives and planners to investigate those bigger strategic decisions, which is what we would call scenario analysis. How else can you allocate the funding and what does that do for the business?
Yeah, Matt, another thought I had on that as well is that I can't tell you how many times, I try to present a value or a business case to somebody and somebody says, well, I don't believe you. Okay. So how does digital help you substantiate or make a plan more defensible?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think there's a few things. I think digital enables kind of easier flow of information between people and within organizations themselves, right? If you can get that line of sight between whether that be your EAM systems or, on the asset side or your capital project systems, it just kind of reduces that lag that happens with traditional tools like Excel. And it means that, you're making decisions based on the most current and up-to-date information.
Yeah, so ease of making changes and establishing what are the factors that it's really based on. And Phil, you talked about having a framework, so having a measurable framework that you're evaluating all the different projects against, I think really makes a big difference. Hey, Phil, you also mentioned that there was a particular case study maybe that you could share with us that gave a good example of how maybe a large company used digital to be able to create success. Can you maybe give us an example and talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, and the reason the one I'm picking is Enbridge actually, and there is just some dynamics in the oil and gas and chemical industry that I just thought were mirrored in Enbridge's journey. I mean, what they saw in their business was their growth rate. They'd been going through huge growth for a long period of time, but they recognized that was going to be declining. The growth rate would be declining. They really need to focus on optimizing their core business. And what they recognized was that was going to involve an asset management transformation as well as a capital planning transformation. And they decided to drive it from a capital planning transformation starting point where they said, follow the money, because that's how people make decisions. They want to know how the money's being spent. They want to know they're getting the maximum value for that money, the executives. So they said, let's start there. Let's start with a capital planning transformation. And to do that, the problem they had all these siloed decisions. They were making decisions across pieces of the business, but it was really hard to compare, to understand why they would spend money here versus here versus here, because it didn't have a common definition of value. They weren't really utilizing risk data consistently across the business, and their understanding of risk tolerances in the business kind of varied. And so they said, look, we need to clean all this up and get a crisp understanding of what drives value for our business and use that across the board. So we went through a process with them, developed what we call a value framework, and that ended up being applied for their liquid pipelines business, their gas pipelines business, their gas distribution business, and their renewable power. And they used it for all decision making. And they started off. When they built that value framework, it also included ESG measures, right? So now they've got to this point now where they have this consistent definition of value. They have a consistent process. They have a consistent tool, enterprise-wide tool, which is the software solution we have, that they use across the business. And here's the kind of results they get. Their biggest thing they noticed in the first planning cycle was that cultural transformation I talked about, where people started talking more about the business and what's right for the business, and a little bit less about how do I get my project approved. But in the last planning cycle, in the fiscal 2022 planning cycle, when they went through that process, they uncovered an additional $361 million of value that they wouldn't have seen had they not gone through this process. So these are really big impacts when you go through a transformation process like this. After the event's over, I can post a link. There's a whole interview with Carmen Benoit of Enbridge on our website, and she walks through this whole thing and what it did for their business. So I can post that link at the end of the session.
Yeah, that would be great. So if you guys are watching and you want to see some more about this case study, Phil will post a link to the interview in the comments if you want to take a look at it. Phil, you mentioned that they achieved as much as $360 million worth of additional value. Okay. Just to make it clear to people, when you're talking about value, what might value consist of? I know it's not just return on investment capital or return on investment. When you say value, what do you really mean by that?
Right. So, and again, it'll vary by organization. To Matt's point earlier, value isn't something we prescribe. It's something we work with you to define, for your organization. But for Enbridge, a lot of that could be risk mitigation improvements. It would be also definitely hard financial benefits. It could be they might quantify. I actually don't know their value framework off the top of my head, but typical things might also be reliability improvements, other risk management type benefits. So those are just some examples of what that might be. ESG measures, like how are they? When you're moving toward a lower climate economy. Not all that stuff is negative ROI. There's a lot of really positive benefits that can come from that. So those things are also included in their framework.
Matt, you've told me some of this before in the past, is that if you're an asset manager out there and you're trying to justify, maintenance dollars to be able to maintain, assets, is that how does capital planning, digital capital planning, improve your ability to be able to justify, maintenance dollars or, for assets?
Yeah, I really think that it comes down to kind of getting everything aligned to a common scale, right? Taking risk, any other KPIs, whatever that is, and being able to tangibly compare them against dollars, right? And once you give people the power to really communicate the value of their projects in the same terms as a growth project or whoever whatever group you're speaking to, it gives them that ammunition to kind of communicate why their projects deserve funding versus others.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Well, it's more of that justification again, or that being able to defend what it is that you put together. That's great. That's good. Hey, gentlemen, we've covered a lot of material, here today, and it's been really very interesting. And I wanted to remind the viewers here today that we actually are doing a 3-part series, which we have called Value Undiscovered. And the reason that we called it that is because many times we don't really know the value that exists until we can do something as sophisticated as digital transformation and advanced analytics. And so if you want to join us again next week, 9 o'clock Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, we're going to continue the discussion. We actually have a new guest next week. We have the Chief Marketing Officer from Copperleaf who's going to be joining us. And his name is what, Phil?
It's Bodwin Nijens. He's a Dutch guy, so easy to mess that up, but it's pretty simple. Bodwin Nijens.
Bodwin Nijens. Okay, and then I understand also he's a chairman of a asset management board. Can you tell me anything about that, or what is his background a little bit?
Bodwin's heavily involved in the Institute of Asset Management internationally. Like he's involved in IAM over in Europe, but he also was a founding member of the IAM chapter in Canada.
Oh, okay. All right. Excellent. I saw a picture of him on one of your websites and he was riding in a big orange boat. What was that all about?
Bodwin is Bodwin. So the Coast Guard in Canada is volunteer, and Bodwin's part of the volunteer Coast Guard. And actually that's a very sophisticated boat, goes very fast, has a lot of equipment on it. Bodwin is the asset manager for that boat. So he's responsible for asset management. So he gets real life experience managing that kind of equipment.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, listen, next week we're going to actually focus on, what is digital transformation and advanced analytics have to do with CapEx decisions. And so we're going to take a little bit of a different angle at it and going to take a look at it from a C-series level, from the chief marketing officer's level, and someone who has practical experience in leading standards efforts in the area of the Institute of Asset Management. And we're going to continue this conversation. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining here today. I feel like this was really insightful for me. And listen, if people want to reach out to you and continue this conversation, what's the best way to do that, Matt?
Yeah, they can reach me at email at mhayert@copperleaf.com. Get a hold of me on LinkedIn Okay,
great. Well, good. So thank you. And so it's Matthew, and Phil, and you guys can look them up on LinkedIn. And reach out to them as well. Feel free to do that. Gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting starting conversation, on this discussion about digital transformation and advanced analytics. It really seems to me that there's a tremendous amount of value that can be obtained by applying digital. And for those of you that are watching that have seen my broadcasts in the past, I just want to tell you is that it's really important that we look at industries outside of the ones that we're currently in and see what other industries are doing and see how can we leverage the knowledge and the learnings that have come from other industries, because it's really easy for us to sit in our own little world. And I've worked in aviation, I've worked in construction, I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in the oil and gas industry. And it's really easy for us just to look within the bounds of our own industry and say, what are people doing to be successful in certain areas? But if we really want to be successful, we need to look beyond the boundaries of our own industries into others and see what people are doing and apply those same learnings, into our industry. So I want to thank you guys for sharing, this knowledge today. I think it was really helpful, and it gave me some good insight into how you're using digital today. Phil, thank you. I appreciate it. Matt, thank you. I appreciate it. I have one parting question for both of you, if I could. All right. Phil, what gets you excited today about the industry you're in and the future? What is exciting to you?
For me, like kind of tying into some of the things I said earlier, I just know we can have such a big impact with any organization in terms of helping them make this transformation and get just greatly improved results in the value they're delivering for their business. And also those decisions they're making now are impacting the environment, society. Like it's all tying together into this really big, impactful conversation. And I find that so compelling. I can't let go of it. It's really engaging.
That's really good. Matt, how about if you answer the same thing for me? What gets you excited about, the work that you're doing here today?
Yeah, to me, it comes down to the opportunity, right? Like there's been so much emphasis over the years on executing projects right. And I think people have looked over the opportunity to create value in their organization just by being better at planning, right? Choosing the right projects and executing them correctly, when both done together, can provide immense value.
Yeah, digital transformation and advanced analytics give us a tremendous platform to be able to advance our planning, to be able to consider so many more factors and to be able to consider so many different things in creating success. I really think it's an outstanding time in history, for us, because we're going to be able to do that and do better planning. Thanks for sharing that, guys. I really appreciate it. For those of you watching today, join us back here again next week, Wednesday, 9 o'clock Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, and we'll continue with our next broadcast. Thank you for joining us today, gentlemen. I appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you, Mark. It was a real pleasure. That was fun.
Yeah,
good, very good. All right, everybody watching, fair winds and following seas to you, and have a great day. Bye.